Now we're ready to test a stitch to make sure our machine is threaded properly. Our stitch length dial and stitch selector dial are already selected for a straight stitch. So I'm going to place my fabric under the presser foot, lower the presser foot, and begin sewing. Turn the hand wheel towards you so the needle is in the highest position and starts to go downwards. Raise the presser foot and trim the threads. My stitches look good on the top and the bottom. If your stitches look like this on top, but look loopy on the bottom, that means that your upper thread probably isn't threaded properly. Rethread the machine and check out your user's manual for more information. Now let's sew a seam. Now we're going to sew a seam. My machine is already set up for the straight stitch, but if yours isn't, all you need to do is turn your stitch selector dial so it's on the straight stitch, and you'll feel it click into place. On my dial, I see a black stitch and a blue stitch. And to know which stitch I'm going to do, I'm going to come up to the stitch length dial and I see a black range of numbers and a blue S1. To sew the black stitch, I need my stitch length selected in this black area. And 2.5 is pretty standard, so I'm going to keep it there. Up at the top, we have our green stitch width dial. And for a straight stitch, you want it set to 0 because a straight stitch has no stitch width. Take your fabric. On our needle plate, you'll see some markings. The third line from the presser foot is for a 5/8 seam allowance, which is a very common seam allowance on projects. Place your fabric so it lines up with the third line, and lower your presser foot. Sew forward a few stitches. Press and hold the reverse lever to sew backwards a few stitches. Release the reverse lever and continue down your seam. When you reach the end of your fabric, press and hold the reverse lever and sew backwards a few stitches. Release and sew to the end. Always remember to turn the hand wheel towards you. If you turn your hand wheel backwards or away from you, it'll cause your machine to jam the next time you sew. So remember, always turn it towards you. Raise the presser foot and trim the thread. I did reverse stitching at the beginning and the end of my seam to keep it from coming unraveled as I work on my project. Now let's take a look at some of our other stitches. Next, I want to try out a zigzag stitch. So I'm going to turn my stitch selector dial to the zigzag, and I see my stitch length is already at 2.5, which is about medium. So I'm going to come up to my stitch width, which ranges from 0 to 5, and also put it at about 2.5. Let's see what that looks like. So I'm going to put my fabric under the presser foot, lower the presser foot, and sew. And here we have just a medium zigzag. Next, let's make a narrow and short zigzag. So I'm going to shorten my stitch length down to 1, and I'm going to move my stitch width down to 1 as well. Let's see what this looks like. Here we have a very small zigzag. Now, I'm going to keep the stitch length at a 1, but let's move the width all the way up to 5. And let's check this one out. And there's what short and wide looks like. Now, let's go back to stitch length and let's make it as long as I can at number 4. And we'll leave the width at 5, so it's as long and wide as it can be. Let's try sewing that out. Check out how different all of these zigzag stitches are because I played with my length and width dials. Now let's take a look at another decorative stitch. Now I want to sew one of the blue stitches. I'm going to turn my stitch selector dial and I'm going to select this feather stitch because I think it's pretty. I'm going to go up to the stitch length dial and move it so that there's an S1. Blue and blue. Now the blue stitches are typically called stretch stitches, but we can also use them for decorative purposes. My stitch width dial is set to 5, which is really nice for these kinds of stitches. So I'm going to test sew it out. And there's our feather stitch. Now I want to sew a slant overedge stitch. This is a very popular stitch. So I see there's blue, and my stitch width is at 5. So let's try this out. This machine has a lot of great different stitches, so play around with your dials, have some fun, and now let's make a buttonhole.